Thank you, and thanks to the conference organizers for inviting me to speak and be part of this really fascinating and important discussion. And when Marcia asked if I would like to speak about the display of the Bader collection in our new building, which is expected to be delivered in 2026, I was wondering if my contribution would actually fit in with this year's Congress theme, since Agnes's collection has never been presented through a permanent display in the past and will also not be shown as such in the future, though we've heard today that permanence is also just a myth, so maybe I fit in just perfectly fine. But so my talk today will represent somewhat of an alternative route for smaller institutions for whom permanent displays may not be optimal or even desired for a variety of reasons. So for those of you who do not know us, Agnes is a university museum on the campus of Queen's University in Kingston, Canada, which is on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and Huron-Wendat. Since its founding in 1957, as a result of Agnes Etherington's bequeathing her home as an art gallery to further the cause of art and community, collections have been shown via quickly rotating temporary exhibitions, typically changing over multiple times a year. So starting in the late 1960s, Queen's alum, Dr. Alfred Bader, who is someone who's known to many of you, I'm sure, and his family started gifting significant European paintings, a process that only recently concluded with a final bequest of his late widow, Dr. Isabel Bader. The Bader collection at Agnes today holds close to 300 artworks, including 4 works by Rembrandt. And given the prominence of this collection, a changing selection of works has typically always been on display. Certainly since 2000, the year of our last expansion, when the collection got its own gallery space in the museum. And so here's just a few examples of past exhibitions. Some of my predecessors who are also here have worked on. You can see it's, certainly it's been a colorful situation. So, but the latter, so this own gallery space, this dedicated gallery space, will change in the new building, which we refer to as Agnes Reimagined. And this new building project is made possible through a really significant and wonderful lead gift of Bader Philanthropies. So Agnes Reimagined, it's designed by KPMB architects in Toronto and guided by a community-engaged design process. And Agnes Reimagined rethinks museum works and practices truly from the ground up. I don't have time in this presentation to discuss everything that this entails, but a few key points regarding the vision to mention here are: 1, the return of the historic Etherington house into a home, both literally to function as a live-in artist residency for temporary residences, and conceptually as providing the guiding institutional principle of hospitality. Secondly, the functioning of the various museum spaces as an ecosystem in which museum practices coexist and flow in and out of each other organically and non-hierarchically. And finally, that all of this is designed to ensure that Indigenous and Western worldviews sit side by side as equals. So as I mentioned, the Bader collection, like all other collecting areas at Agnes, will no longer be tied to one dedicated gallery, but will instead be presented in varying exhibition spaces as suited to the changing needs of different exhibition concepts, supported by a near doubling in exhibition space, which will give us more space, but still we're relatively small compared to many of colleagues here. The galleries will also offer more opportunities to activate the collection through transhistoric, there it is again, and cross-cultural conversations. So what could this look like? So there's no big reveal here today, I'm afraid, since we really will start working on our opening program in earnest this fall. However, since 2021, we have started prototyping different curatorial strategies that will inform this process, and I would like to talk a little bit more holistically about that here with a few examples. So the first strategy concerns the creation of an exhibition program that seeks thematic connection across galleries, operating through a constellation revolving around one or several what we call anchor shows. For instance, the exhibition Studies in Solitude, which was mounted at Agnes amid the upheavals of the COVID-19 pandemic. This exhibition drew from the Bader collections many paintings that depict figures in solitary contexts, including scholars, hermits, and subjects engaged in private devotion. And at the center of the gallery, we also had a reflection room, which I co-curated with my colleague Sebastian Lein, who was our curator of care and relations, as well as undergraduate intern Emma Tau. And visitors were invited to leave testimony. And this exhibition was open a bit longer than temporary exhibitions typically were. I know it sounds like this is very short compared to some of the durations we've talked about. But for us, it was a bit longer. And this was both due to the then still ongoing lockdowns that happened, but also to allow for related and durational programs and exhibitions to be developed alongside it. So in tandem with this exhibition, for instance, an artist micro-residency program called Studios in Solitude was established. And its main goal was to match the then underutilized programming spaces at Agnes, because of the pandemic, of course, with local artists, as well as providing financial and in-kind support. And among several outcomes of the Studios in Solitude residency, multiple artists produced work that was subsequently exhibited at Agnes. So for instance, multidisciplinary artists Shelby Lisk beaded and gifted earrings to close friends and relatives, and created a series of photographic portraits of the recipients presented as a solo show following the residency in the spring of 2022. And so in resonance with the concurrent Studies in Solitude exhibition in the Bader Gallery, Lisk invited visitors of her exhibition to sit down at a desk from her childhood home and write letters of appreciation to loved ones. So while one exhibition encouraged audiences to look inward, the other explicitly encouraged them to reach out. Similar dynamics were evoked by the adjacency of the Studies in Solitude exhibition to the solo show of Chris Carreri, who's a Toronto-based artist, in the then Contemporary Feature Gallery. Midway through the run of Studies in Solitude, we opened the wall between the two galleries, establishing a more direct relationship between the themes and aesthetics of Carreri's work and the Baroque paintings on the wall in the Bader Gallery. And so such compelling adjacencies are lovingly known at Agnes as what we call the reverberating etches, which is a term coined by our director and curator, Emily Chenger. A bit later, Chris, Emily, and I also worked together to create a small exhibition that was situated in between these two larger ones called the Dark Room, which featured 17th century hermit prints after Maarten de Vos and works by Chris. So this was the reverberating edge manifested, if you will, and acknowledging the powerful potential of both mental refuge and erotic fantasy that was inherent to viewing these works. The exhibition functioned as a performative didactic, so each body of work acting as a vehicle through which to read and surface submerged context in the other. And I should mention perhaps also that none of these reverberations were necessarily strategically planned in this way. They grew out of continued conversations and collaborations that took place at Agnes between staff and artists. So finally, and briefly, I will also highlight an exhibition series called Collection Count and Care, which sought to reflect on our collections as we started the inventorying and packing process. At 2-week intervals, it featured small presentations of work from the collection. And so the ones that I have on screen here, this was co-curated by myself and Associate Curator Arts of Africa, Dr. Kanida Lila. And this installation showed a small magot mask from the Dan in Liberia, which was paired with several miniatures from the European collection, including a miniature portrait of a man from the Bader collection. And they were brought together in a Victorian era head box that normally is resigned to default. This intimate grouping drew out unexpected similarities between these highly personal items, like their original significance as effectively charged markers of familial bonds and their dissonant existence as objects of quote-unquote unknown makers in a museum context. The Western terminology long associated with the magot, which was once referred to as a passport mask, as well as the ivory on which one of the miniature portraits was painted, further connected these works both to each other and to shared histories of colonial conquest and extraction. So rather than functioning as an island unto itself, European art within this constellation of exhibitions and ways of working sought connection to perspectives that grappled with historical and cultural contexts of their own. While the works by Lisk and Carreri, for instance, were not on view alongside paintings in the Bader Gallery, they still allowed visitors to draw relationships across Agnes's ecosystem of exhibitions, each autonomous yet converging on shared themes of solitude and its opposites or adjacencies. Brought together, such connections seem to query, could cultural belongings that at times sit uncomfortably together form new bonds of kinship? Along this process, I've thought a lot about the significance that we know Alfred Bader assigned to the command to love thy neighbor, which he interpreted very broadly and very generously. And in working with the Bader collection, it seems fair then to keep asking, how can we be a good neighbor? How can collections and curators be good neighbors to each other within the same complicated home? And this is Agnes Reimagined's great task, and these are just some initial strategies to start to work. Thank you.